Well, Terry, thank you for that introduction. I'm very pleased to be a part of this series. And I'm going to be sharing a personal journey with work incentives and particularly using PASS for self-employment. I guess the reason I call it a personal journey is because I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I'd been and then how I got to where I am today. And the purpose of today, where we want to get to, is using the PASS plan to build a business. And I don't think that's a new concept to any of you. But what's most commonly done is that a PASS plan is used to start a business. So it's used in the first 18 months of a business startup. Mine was done differently, and it was done as a business expansion tool. I had actually been in business 7 years when I decided to approach the PASS cadre with a proposal to get increased revenues for my business. By way of background, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. When I was 4 years old, I had my first panic attack. It was the last day of school, and everybody brought a lunch, and we were in the big lunchroom, and just everything went crazy for me. I had a full-blown panic attack. My mom had to come and pick me up at school, and of course, then they didn't really know what that was. That wasn't considered anxiety disorder. I think I was basically considered weird, teased by other kids, problems in elementary school, but then when I got to junior high and high school, I realized that school was my forte, and that helped calm me down. The other thing that happened to me when I was younger is that I was running without paying attention where I was going, and I fell off a cliff and landed about 25 feet down and injured my knees pretty seriously. So those are a couple of the things that have influenced, and as I've gotten older, have become bigger problems. So I was a person that always liked self-employment, though. And if you go back and you look on my tax returns, you're going to see that from about age 21 on, I was always filing the Schedule C, the tax form for self-employment. I have done a lot of different things in that area. And I also helped start 3 or 4 other businesses. And so self-employment seemed like a natural thing for me later. One of my first jobs after I got my master's degree in English was to get a teaching job at Iowa State University. And this is one of the few times that I actually had an employer. I had graduated, I finished my master's degree, and then I really went into a couple years of agoraphobia. And when they called me to teach, I just really wanted to do it really badly. So I went to Iowa State and I took the job, and I really loved it. But after a few years, I realized that I wasn't going to get tenure because I had a master's degree. And I was grading papers on Sundays, and then sometimes they would switch your teaching assignment at the last minute, and all those things produced a lot of anxiety for me again. And so I left that job. Some of the startup businesses I was involved with, the first one was a company that was a jury research, like what Dr. Phil did for Oprah. This was one of the original companies way back in 1982. There were really only about 5 people doing this in the United States, and this person I worked for was one of them, and I was one of 2 first staff she hired. She had been working by herself and had started getting more business, so I was one of the people that she hired. And I took a clerical job actually with her, but within 3 months I was doing the research design and interpretation. I think that I liked being part of founding staff because there's no structure yet, and also you can kind of create the structure for the business. And then also creative thinking is a must. It's something that you need, and you're not upsetting any boat because you're making the boat, you're building it as you're going. That company still exists, and is easily into 6 or 7 figures. The second company was a nonprofit I worked for. My daughter has an autoimmune disease that developed in 1982 to 84. And so I left that jury research company and I became the Iowa State Director for the National Alopecia Areata Foundation. And I started support groups all across the state. And so this is really my first venture into disability awareness and education. I had a newsletter that I circulated to all the dermatologists in the state of Iowa, and I was named Leader of the Month by the National Foundation in 1984, which I know seems like a long time ago. The next thing is I got a job in a faith-based organization where they wanted to expand their programming so that they could appeal to younger people in the community. And so the executive director and I was our job to brainstorm and figure out what kind of new programs to start. I had always used nannies when I worked, even when I was away from home part-time. And I didn't seem to have trouble recruiting nannies. And I had done it for a lot of friends. So one of the things, they always say, look at what you've done to start a business. We talked about starting, and we did start a nanny placement agency. And I guess this was my first foray into employment services, since I think I interviewed about 1,000 people a year for that position. And that became so successful that it outgrew the faith-based organization, and they ended up selling it for real life money. And I got a little bonus, which was nice. But that company still exists and under a different name and is owned by someone else. Another business that I helped open at that same agency was a daycare that had intergenerational programming. They had just built a new senior living center and there was empty space in it, and so we decided to put a daycare in there. And we had intergenerational programming where the seniors would interact with the children at the daycare. That at the time was very revolutionary, and we received a lot of national awards for it. And the logo was "At Last, There's Someplace Like Home." So it was very successful, and I think the countertop I picked out is probably still there. So I had an idea, why am I helping everyone else start such successful businesses? I did always like to be number 2, but it was even suggested to me by the top management at the faith-based organization that I really should be heading up my own company. So I was thinking about that, and then life intervened. In 1991, when I was 39, and in many ways in my career prime, my life became a huge train wreck. Actually, there was no train involved, but the damages were similar. I was hospitalized for 3.5 months, during which my anxiety symptoms were diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. And while I was hospitalized, I had many losses, just as many of you probably have had. My husband left me. I was unable to return to my job, which had been a good job. And I was discharged to care for my children, who were 5 and 10, and then try to rebuild some kind of life. I left the hospital after 3.5 months, even though my rehabilitation wasn't complete. But there were threats that I might lose custody of my children, and that was really important to me, that I was the custodial parent. And so even though I needed more time to heal, I left to care for my children. Let's see, let me go back just for a second. Becoming SSDI eligible. Now, some of you are going to be envious about this, but I actually have no recollection of how I became SSDI eligible. I think when I was hospitalized, the doctors must have filled it out, the forms out, and whatever my involvement was, I really have no memory of. And I did get it on the first round, so some people do. That's not completely a myth. And I do remember being very grateful for the income, though, when I came out to work with my children. Recovering. Recovering, as you all know, is not easy. And in about 1993, I wanted to work again, but I was told by my caregivers, doctors, and psychiatrists that I really wasn't ready for professional work like I'd done before. And I sometimes get this now in my work as a rehab counselor, where clients want to return to work, but they don't want to start at anything less than what they used to do. And what I started doing was a friend, Jane Johnson, owned Primrose Design. She had a warehouse where people put together things for Hallmark stores to send out and gifts. And she offered me a position for $6 an hour, which I had been making $15 an hour back in '82. But to me, it was a tremendous gift, and I absolutely took the opportunity. And this is something I think would be so helpful for a lot of people, because I sat around a big table with 15 other women, and we shrink wrapped pads of paper, we put magnets on pencils, we tied raffia bows on things, and we made gift baskets for Hallmarks all across the United States. And after everything I had been through, sometimes this job was stressful. Like when I went from shrink wrapping to tying raffia bows, I got a little nauseous. And then when I went from tying bows to pulling orders, I couldn't go to work the first day because I was so anxious. Talk about a fall from where I had been before. And yet somehow I knew that this was healing for me. And I knew I needed to do it. And how much better to have a $6 an hour job that you can't get to than to have gone back into a major career with a lot of people looking at you for leadership. And I think it was the best thing ever happened to me. I thank God my friend could offer me the opportunity. And I just think that we oftentimes make a mistake when we don't decide to do something that's maybe occupational therapy to help you heal. And I did that for several years. Some days when my pride hurt, they would give me a name tag. Like one time they made me the floor manager. That meant that if anything fell on the floor, I was the manager of it. But it was funny. It helped me, and I felt supported by other people. The other thing I did at this time was I found a mission. I didn't just like walk down the street and find it like in the alley, but I did what I always did, which was go back to graduate school. And when I went back there, I thought I was going to maybe get a doctorate in education. But the first class I took was in rehabilitation counseling. And a huge light went on for me because I thought, this is where everybody is. This is where the real people are. And this is where the survivors are. So I got very excited about that. And I think the structure of school was something that was real compatible with like my anxiety disorder. I'd always like arrive a little late, and then I would try to sit by the door. And I think by that way I showed that I wasn't entrapped by the class and I could come and go as I wanted to. And that's always worked for me. So that's something that I've always done. But rehabilitation really excited me because I thought as I recovered, perhaps other people could learn from that or be a part of it. So I thought I would get my certification in rehabilitation counseling and then help other people. So first Inklings of Prism Group LLC, which is the company I own today. When I was in graduate school, I had worked for another self-employed vocational evaluator who had a disability. I realized that evaluation was something that I liked. It appealed to my left brain thinking and kept me out of my right brain emotions. And I think it was good for me. And in 1997, I did an internship at the Veterans Administration. and I suddenly had accommodations, which of course I'd never heard of before. And the accommodations were basically that I would set my own schedule and that I would be able to come and go as I wanted. I had a lot of responsibility. I had a counseling caseload, but I would schedule people and I would be there for when they needed me. And then also I was helping work with the staff to train them on various assessment instruments so they could bring assessment in-house. So it was a very nice balance, and having the accommodations made such a difference to me that I suddenly learned a lot about myself and a lot about how I didn't have to have such a difficult life if I could do something like that. When I finished school, I immediately thought of self-employment. When I say self-employment again, too, in some ways I think of those business startups as being self-employment because I had a lot of latitude. If you could, for instance, in the jury research one, if you could invent a study that they'd be able to bill for, then you earned your freedom to do, come and go when you needed to. But I think at this time self-employment seemed like the only alternative for me. And if you look at this PowerPoint and you look at like schedule, and I could write at night, and it says hate being bored, but I actually got very anxious when I was bored. And I had always been pushed because I had a lot of ability, so I wanted to just be able to push myself. And I could take time off and control over my schedule, and then when I had new ideas, I could implement them. But you know, it's really mostly about scheduling. And I think that that's something for people with anxiety disorders or many other kinds of disabilities, perhaps where you need to rest at certain times, or you have days that might be good and days that might be bad. Self-employment for me has been where I can kind of disappear if I'm having a day that isn't right and I need to take care of myself, and I don't have to broadcast it to anybody, which was an advantage over employment. I wasn't naive. I knew that if you're self-employed, that every client is your boss. So I was very good at, I would schedule people far enough apart so that I have time to rest in between if I needed to. Then I could be very much on when I worked with people. So that was something that was really important. My first ideas of self-employment was, again, to do something with rehabilitation counseling. And in particular, I'd had experience in job placement with a nanny placement agency. I had experience in rehabilitation counseling at the Veterans Administration. So I really had a lot of options there. To start the business was difficult because I had no money. And I'm sure that sounds familiar to you. I was involved with Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation, and they have a program called First Step. That's a program where they help micro enterprises get started. And you have $2,500 that you get in a grant. And I used that to pay for the first 6 months of rent. I had actually found a psychologist who didn't need her office every day, and so I rented it for 1.5 days a week for $150 a month. And the First Step funds paid for the 6 months of rent, the liability insurance, and some assessments that I got. So I started small and I started slow. And I think if at that time I knew where Prism would end up, I probably would have just hid under my bed. I wouldn't have gone to work at all because I was ready for something small. One of the early things I did was to come up with, I guess, something that's called trademarks. I didn't know that. A marketing person told me that. But one of the things was we would find these cards, and I know that you can't see them well, but I'll read them to you. Some of them were by Louise Hayes, who is into like healing yourself. And it would be a card that says, like this one says, I focus on what's really important to me in life. And the back says quality rather than appearance. This ethics rather than rules, integrity rather than domination, knowledge rather than achievement, and serenity rather than acquisitions. And I would just draw these at random, and I would put them on every invoice I sent. And at first I just did it because I liked these and I wanted to like share them, and I thought they were pretty. But it became, for the counselors, particularly my main client was Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation, they really looked forward to getting bills from me because there would be something like this in them. And in fact, I had one counselor call me once and say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to pay you because I didn't get a card in my invoice. So I had to correct that very quickly. But, you know, you can buy them 52 for like $15, so they weren't expensive, but they turned out to be meaningful. And the other nice thing is you would go down to like Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation and you could just see these posted different places, and you could see that people were visibly seeing your presence when you were there. And some counselors had enough that they could wallpaper their whole little side window, and when you saw a counselor that only had one, you knew where you needed to mark it next. We also like had pens made up, and these are very inexpensive, but we would make sure that every client we ever worked with had at least one. And you know what's funny is people who work for the public don't get good pens to work with. They all have those little Bics. So these have grips on them and stuff, and these are very inexpensive, but people just valued them. And they'd call up and say, I need another pen. So those are just two inexpensive things that I did, and I really didn't realize at the time what I was doing. I didn't realize that I was creating like a trademark for Prism Group, and yet it was so unique and different that I really was. So that was kind of neat. The other things I thought was, I didn't do a lot of marketing otherwise than the handing things out to people, and I just thought if I did a good job with everything I did, and if I kept my word for things that I did, and I was very honest and ethical, that I would do a good job and growth would follow. And that turned out to be true. From 1997 to 2004, the business grew to a point where we had a suite of offices. In 2005, I was voted Counselor of the Year in the whole state of Iowa, which shocked me because I didn't know people in Iowa knew me. I just thought, you know, people who were in Des Moines knew me. Another thing I did was I really finally needed some help, and I went to, and I think this is based on my SCORE executive's suggestion, I looked at the pool of retired professionals as people who might want to contract with me. The reason I thought that was because these were people who had developed a work ethic, enjoyed freedom but could use some money, and they knew how to reach goals. So I, in fact, found an MSW, Bonnie Tyson, who still works with me today, and she helped me with my assessments and different aspects of assessment and work adjustment, and then a retired PhD that would draft the first draft of my reports. I took verbatim notes, and so he would write them up for me, and it just saved me a lot of time. One of the things I noticed now, though, was that my chronic pain from my knee injuries in particular, and my back, was the biggest thing that was limiting me. I didn't even want to go out of the house sometimes. I'd sit in there and I'd think, I can't get out, because there were stairs down the front and the back of my house. I have an older home with character, but they had very steep steps. And then also sometimes when I'd come home from work, I'd just sit in the car and I would look at the house and I would go, boy, that's going to be hard to get in there. And I wouldn't always bring my homework home, or I wouldn't take it in the house. I'd always leave it in the car. And so those kinds of things were limiting me. And I didn't quite know what I was going to do about that. Let's see, what's our next PowerPoint here? Yeah, we also had financial problems with growth. Everything had been done on a cash basis. And I had to earn the money and then pay for something. And I really needed Prism to pay for itself because I didn't have any money I could give to it. And I had become dependent on some of the income to meet my personal expenses. But you know, I had banked at the same bank for 30 years. And during that time, I'd been upper middle class most of the time. But I, like many people with disabilities, had suffered some financial hardships in the 1990s. But even in 2004, they wouldn't even give me a $500 line of credit. And by 2004, we were cash flowing over $100,000 through that bank. But they wouldn't give me a line of credit at all. And I don't know if my being disabled, being a woman, what had to do with it, but it was very, very frustrating. And this is when I started to think about how am I going to generate more cash to do expansion and to get established. In 2004, we were doing Social Security benefits planning. I'd gotten certified as a BPAO. We were doing comprehensive vocational evaluations, counseling, and then a disability adjustment program that we actually had developed, Bonnie Tyson and I. I had noticed that when people got done with their evaluations, they would be really gung-ho and excited about the goals that we got. And then when it was to become a reality and they were going to go out and look for the job or take the training, they would be stuck. So we developed a program for people with disabilities that wanted to go back to work but were stuck. And basically it was developed exclusively by Bonnie and I. It took us 2 years to market it so that vocational rehabilitation in our state would pay for it. And but even with that, we were not generating much revenue. So I started thinking about a PASS plan, and I was remembering back in the 90s when I had seen, that was before the BPAO project, but I had seen one benefits planner who told me that I was not able to track well enough to have a PASS plan. And since I wasn't really clear on what a PASS was, I believed her. The other thing is I saw then about a year later a different person who was a benefits planner, and she told me that PASSes were not a good idea for anybody. They were only good for the person who wrote them and got paid to write them. So that was my thought about PASS and myself until I took the BPAO training. I went to a training by David Hammis, and as he showed me ways that PASS was used, it really changed my thinking. And I began to reconsider the PASS plan. Now, what was different again was my business now was already 7 years old, and it also was producing a lot of gross revenue. I had 3 subcontractors working for me, and I had a half-time secretary. So this wasn't exactly a startup business. But what I wanted to do was expand it. One, I wanted to have cash to do different things that needed to be done if Prism was to stay stable. The first thing I did was talk to David Hammis about my idea. As many of us who know him, he's an expert on the POMS, the Policy Manual for Social Security, and he went through that and found out that business expansion probably would be considered a legitimate PASS issue. And then I also discussed it with the PASS cadre in Kansas City for our region, and that was Tim McAvoy, who is very open and considerate when you have a new idea. And they both said they thought it was possible and that I needed to work on a plan and a proposal. So I thought about what would I ask for. Well, here's a picture of getting into my house from my driveway. Now, to be very honest, there were some steps there. You didn't have to high jump to get in it. But you can see where the steps were taken off. They were very steep, and it was really hard to get into the house with seriously bad knees. And so I wanted to put ramp access into my house, and I wanted to do it for two reasons. One was for myself, so that I could more easily get in and out of the house. The second reason I wanted to do it was because my house was well set up to have a home office if I wanted to have one. And I knew I had some surgeries in the future, like knee replacements, and I thought it was possible that I would need to see clients. And so I wanted my house to be accessible for clients. So the way I did my proposal to the past plan 2 was I wrote it about if I had this, like a ramp added to my home, then I could get in and out of the house. I would have less pain, because every time I would go down those steps, I could hear the crunching and the cracking in my knees. And I would be in pain by the time I got to the bottom of the steps that would last for the day. And so I would say that if I had a ramp and less pain, then I would be able to work so many more hours, which I think for the ramp, I said that I would be able to work at half hour more a day, which doesn't sound much, but it's 10 hours a month, and I felt that I could make that much more money by working 10 hours a month. So another thing I wanted was ergonomic workstations. I was working at desks that had been invented or been built way before there were even computers. So mostly I would work for a little while and I'd have to stop because my shoulder would get sore. And, you know, my hands and my wrists would get kind of numb. Now this picture you're looking at is the after picture. I wasn't going to show you the before picture. It was just too bad. And too messy desked. But this is an after picture of what I was able to get, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But I wanted, as you can see, it's a corner desk. There's a new chair that's built for a person my size, a new computer screen that I could see, and it could be back, not cluttering my desk. Underneath was the adjustable computer shelf. And so it was a lot more ergonomically sound than anything I had ever worked on. And I had figured out when I proposed this to the past plan was that I would be able to edit 2 more reports per month, and then I would have a gain of 10 hours of work a month. One of the last things I was thinking that I would like in my past plan was to purchase in bulk testing materials. Some of them can be quite expensive, and what was happening is I might give a client $100 worth of testing materials, and then I'd have to wait probably a month and a half to get paid $500. So it was very stressful. I used to, a lot of times, I kind of lay awake going, okay, I'm going to get money from this, I'm going to pay it to that, and I think you all know what that's like just in your personal budgeting, but then I was doing that with that and also with my professional budgeting. And even though it looked like a pretty successful agency, it financially, it was on the edge. One of the reasons was we did do a lot of extra things for clients, because I felt like people who have, it seems like people who have money get treated really nicely, and people who don't. So I wanted each person to really feel valuable when they came to the office, and we would furnish them with beverages, and including soda if they wanted it, and then snacks. I found people did better on their testing if they could snack during it, and there is some evidence too that in certain types of psychiatric disabilities you can perform better if you have a little higher sugar level. So we had candy around. So I was having a lot of stress worrying if I would have what I needed. And if I could get testing materials in my pass plan, that would save me money with discounts. So I went ahead and I wrote the pass. And as I said, for each thing that I asked for, I would say, how much money did I need to make, and how many hours could I work in addition to that by having the things in my pass plan. So David Hammes actually did my financial projections. I gave him a profit and loss for a year, and then I seem to have lost my ability to do financial projections, and I was very grateful to him for his work. And we figured I had about $1,200 to put in a pass account each month. That included most of my, all of my SSDI except for $20, and then half of what I was earning. And so if the pass ran 18 months, that would be $21,000 I'd have to infuse into my business. And it was a little bit more money than we'd planned that we needed, but it wasn't more money that we could possibly need for actual real business expenses. So we submitted it. One thing I did have on it was to get a Whirlpool tub for my bathroom for my arthritis, and that was something they didn't feel they could approve. But get a picture of this now. So Prism is 7 years old. We've asked for expansion funds up to $21,000 from Social Security. And because of my status as a BPAO, which is Benefits Planning Assistance and Outreach Specialist, the past cadre worked very closely with Baltimore in analyzing the plan, because I'd had a lot of interactions with the past cadre for past plans for other people. And it was approved, although they didn't approve the Whirlpool, which was a little disappointing because that would have been nice. And look at the back of my house. That door you're looking at was the one you saw before that was just hanging there by itself. This is the ramp. It was 48 feet long, so it had to go in 2 levels. So the lower level goes up, and then there's a bench where you can sit, and then the higher level goes. And I'm guessing it's not completely completed in this picture because there's no railings on the top. So there were railings when they got finished. But it cost less than we'd projected, which was really nice. So we projected around $6,000, and it was only $3,400. And that was good because when we got into doing the ergonomic workstations, that was a lot more money than we expected. And this is, again, a picture of my current office, but you can see that I have a lot of storage space where I don't have to get up and down. In fact, all of it's pretty much accessible to me from my chair. Overhead storage that I can reach, a bulletin board on the back where I could put important things, and then a drawer on either side, which you can't really see, but I have file drawers on either side. And then where my coffee cup sits, which shouldn't have been in the picture, is a file cabinet. And this is actually my current offices. So what was nice about it, that it was versatile. This furniture was made to measure, and it was made to fit me. And that was one of the reasons that it was more expensive. And since I've had that, I haven't had to quit working because my shoulder hurts. And I had made do all my life. So it was interesting, even though I had preached ergonomics to other people, I had no idea what a huge difference having ergonomics could make. Because, my back pain, shoulder pain, wrist pain, all of the things, they haven't gone away, and I have to take care of them, but they've really improved since I got this. And this is, I can't begin to thank the program that this was available for me. So also then in testing materials, I was able to buy 6 months worth of testing materials, and that was wonderful. And knowing I could order sooner, it increased my sense of security, and it helped me relax more than working. And since stress for me is an issue, it was just, I just felt more at ease because suddenly I did have things that I needed, things that I wanted, things that the company needed. For instance, I think I got a computer for the secretary, which I had not had for her before. And so these were the major things we got, were the ramp, the ergonomic desks, and then some testing material. But since the ramp had cost less money, I had some things left over. So, and that was how I got things. I had some major car repairs. I had, for instance, the secretary's computer. And then I believe that I upgraded my own. And that was wonderful. So the pass ran about 16 months. And the revenue was, as I said, a welcome addition to making the company work less painfully, and I literally mean my knees didn't hurt quite as much, and more productivity, because we could just schedule away with people instead of worrying like, well, am I going to have enough tests then, or do I got to wait till I could order some more? So it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? And when we started this, both Dave Hammis and I felt I was a guaranteed success story. I was very confident I was going to be. And then I found out, as my pass got close to being over, Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation announced that they were out of funds completely, and they were not going to contract any services, which is in March of 2005. The same month, the money ran out for the benefits planning grant, and I had no work from benefits planning. So I had made a key business error, and I had been too heavily invested in too few vendors. And because I was so busy, I hadn't gone out and developed other vendors. So my two sources of income were the benefits planning grant and Iowa Vocational Rehabilitation Services. And suddenly I had no business. Now I had some that they'd contracted already that I could finish out, and IVRS said they would have more work in October when the new fiscal year came, but neither of those came to pass. So here I was, all geared up, all dressed up, and no place to go. But I am an entrepreneur. So I move forward. It was time to downsize. Now, there's a couple pictures of my two cats. That's Isabel and Scout. And they were pretty content to just lay in the sun. And I probably sat in the sun a little bit with them. But I wasn't a person just to be able to lay around like a cat and be happy with myself. So I finally made the decision that we would leave our offices. This would be November of 2005, that we moved my stuff. We had two offices, a secretarial area, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It was all moved into my garage. And the home office, which we were planning for in the future when I became more physically unable to do things, it became a reality. And so I was geared up. I had the ramp, I had the materials, and I was able to work from my home. And I started to prospect again. I found out what work I could do, and then I examined my options. And though those kitties are cute, they're not good for 24-hour companionship. So it was time to reinvent Prism. One of the things that I had prepared for was to be able to be licensed as a mental health counselor. And that was actually something I never followed through on. After working on my garage in my home office for a couple months, I decided I would go into mental health counseling. And also vendors like the Veterans Administration, where I'd done my internship, and the Department of the Blind started calling me because I suddenly had time for other vendors. And that was a gift, and that was great because it was a very interesting population to work with. And it was a change over what I'd been doing. And just a couple months ago, I moved in with a group of independent therapists, and I've begun the paperwork to get covered by insurance companies. So now my work will all be covered by insurance. And I think people with disabilities and their depression and anxiety will be able to come, and I can use information from other avenues like benefits planning to help them with those issues. What you see there is our logo, Prism Group, Multifaceted Rehabilitation Solutions. This was designed by a graphic arts committee at Grandview College in Iowa. They adopt certain nonprofit companies, although we're for profit, but we weren't making a big profit, companies, and they design logos for them. So the last thing I'm mentioning on this PowerPoint frame is our work adjustment program. And this was what I mentioned before, that Bonnie Tyson and I developed a program for people who were stuck. And that program continued on because it's considered education. So Voc Rehab could pay for it. And I also started to market it to like the Veterans Administration and the Department of the Blind, because it was a very good program. It had demonstrated its effectiveness. Another thing that we did during this slow time was Bonnie Tyson had written visualizations that we used in our work adjustment programming, and the visualizations take you from just learning to relax to where you, and then the next one is like recognizing your own accomplishments, and then there's one called Moving On, where you realize that your backpack is too heavy to carry everything from your past to make it to the future. So you have to go through things in your backpack and decide what you'll leave behind. And then the last one is where you see you're self-employed, and it's not a perfect situation and things don't go right every day, but it's okay, because that's what work is. Nobody loves it every day. And that's a picture of my colleague, Bonnie Tyson. She also co-facilitates our work adjustment training groups. Our CD is available. This is the case of it. I don't know if you could see that. This is available at Amazon.com, or you can also email me, and I think my email will be on one of the resource links. It's an excellent, excellent CD, and one of the things that had happened was for years people have been asking Bonnie for, like, would you tape this or tape this one or tape this one? So she was going home and then making individual tapes and handing them all out. And for about 3 years I'd been saying, we should do a CD, we should do a CD. And so we did. And there were people in the community that were very, very helpful to us by not charging us very much to do it. But it's always more expensive when you do it yourself. Well, that's not really true, I guess. But I just wanted to say a word too about hidden disabilities. I think it's often hard to ask for accommodations when you visibly appear to be okay. And as I got better, I got more matter of fact about my disability, and it got easier for me to ask for the help I needed. And still, like everyone, sometimes I wish I didn't need the help, but I'm glad to get it. And I'm happy with the reinvention we have of Prism Group. And I'm confident a year from now it's going to be, again, a very solid. And the past program, which is appropriate for business expansion, my story was almost a perfect success story, but it may yet be one. And I think you all know self-employment is an excellent option for many people, because people with disabilities need flexibility and they need to focus on what they do best. And I think self-employment sometimes helps you filter out. And in my instance, I did what I had to do and what I did best, and I contracted out what I didn't do best and what I personally didn't have to do. And I received a letter from the past cadre that said the past was not successful, for no reason of my own doing because business disappeared. But I hope that it will be successful soon. The last thing I'll just tell you, to make sure if you decide you'd like to do something like this, you have a business going and you could use those expansion funds, get experts who can help you. I had an excellent SCORE executive, Jim O'Halloran, who had founded O'Halloran Trucking. He was very helpful to me on business issues. And of course, David Hammis was wonderful in helping me with the pieces of the past that were more complicated. And I think for you, if you'd like to do this, your next stop is a conversation with the WIPA program in your state. That's the new program that has replaced the BPAO program. Those are the folks that can help you get your PASS plan going. And I think it's also helpful if you talk to your PASS cadre, because you want to let them know what you're doing and be very confident that funds are not just for beginners. So, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. I hope you found it useful. I'll look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.